Gilg Jew, Gilg J as Gilg Nerach.
As Manabel Fissio, Brian Kjol Shaw, lig thou correrendut Claare Gael. I'm Robert Gutting-Carslach, Robert Carslach.
Have you ever had tell of old Bobby Bob?
And I'm here to bring you this edition of Claare Gael. In the English language, as Syrilg, and in the Manx Gaelic, Chinyanamera, the mother tongue of Ellen Vanning, the Isle of Man. As Banachtan Dutreich, William Gell is describing the goings-on of the open-air meeting of Tynwald on Tynwald Hill there. As he was writing early in 1906, with the final part appearing on the 2nd of June, he was evidently thinking back to the events of 1905 and previous years, and in fact what he's written raises some questions. Son yn achurt, de Hansel as Gretel ei fegit sy Gael, lug den lias voorok, corlige den erok, de Junushen, de gedden reiru, no de wel gorter sy cheer, as manner wel het gedden reiru, de Ginnachulju in Kierjau gedden bes by Agris. The church sought to reclaim midsummer from pagans by making it the feast day of St. John the Baptist. By the old-style calendar, that day coincides with the modern calendar's 5th of July. But before that, John the Baptist, before he came in, the day is associated with Manannan Mac Lir. Tawys geisdiach rys radio banning stasiwn yn asiwn, fysgol ar sgeiliamach by Dúlish, Alan Vannin. The traditionary ballad which tells of Manannan Mac Lir as the protector of the Isle of Man from foreign invaders. We seem to have gone on there. That's an Riddanach Jinua, Sen signed off Eden Macrit the Gael. Now, the traditionary ballad tells of Manannan Mac Lir as the protector of the Isle of Man from foreign invaders, making one man on the Brews appear as 100, and making little boats out of sedge which appear to be great war galleys. And Kurjan Kujak sang that for us there, the finest choir to sing in my front room, as they did yesterday afternoon. Guramai Muyo the Jaru. Now, William Gell has mentioned the legislature convening to promulgate the bills they'd enacted. He goes on to describe some of those taking part. Deemster and some of lesser note. Repeat the lessons learned by rote at Manannan's Witenagemot. Now, the Witenagemot was an Anglo-Saxon National Council or Parliament, also known in shorter form as the Witan. Now comes a part that raises questions. Sturdy and bold, Glenfaber Bob steps forth and, opening wide his gob, trots out his classic for the job. The Deemster then, like encored song, to make it plain to old and young, repeats it in the vulgar tongue. Well, this is a reference to fencing the court, and so Glenfaber Bob will be the coroner of Glenfaber, presumably. But round about the turn of the century, the coroner of Glenfaber was William Kermode. Then a year later he swapped round from year to year then after for a few years with the coroner of Michael. And the coroner of Michael at this time was Philip Tier. So there were no Roberts there to make a Glenfaber Bob, so I'm not quite sure who he's referring to. And the member for Glenfaber wasn't a Robert either. Voor Hansel as Gretel Chlaashen plan a liasvoirok trebi lortrischen den Yesheshek, maar so gidgeert ren Hansel snauw mag as a thais en lee, as ren I chimsige mierende glagen aisle, as gauws wat gol maak as mene geel, ren I lieget out tusjem fair as fair, as na saan me trevene saljeen, van a mieren de glagen aisle lonrige seré hollis, as voor Hansel as Gretel label de gausen en redok as een Irish. A genageert het Klaasjen plan a liasvoirok, te Hansel fedden maagde wel een dorres vol glas, as na wat ik kost na mag aas de redden mieren de glagen ailrish. Te liasvoir kor meer de arren de kaartjou, as de Hansel genu broeljach jen weer egge, as te liege tusjum kin jegen gaus te gulle red. Egge won Lair en Gretel rein en arren Hansel, verskelje sjen egge rish red. Eis veru Carla, as high fast the beg sha, as her denk pecher rees on the patch and bogda. A great midsummer fair or no, traditionally the herring fishery started on Failyon, St. John's feast day, as this song tells us. Here Philligorn gets into singing mode, Skeel sing of Manannan Mac Lir.
Jan de bege stegen kakol de nieuwtje shogalish en se nur ze me get de mush vege hasatjes taschen is heute merens van en nie en lunveletje as a vrij dag zien dat dakrelt on de golle solle spinjon.
We've jumped ahead here one place. Right, we'll try again.
Van en Vintons minne kin non gitel en jisieren Tredden on korres na preden side Gor de charknen medan Son Failyon be much go on the yiggins and wabens skillen Here's a kin rade journey ja Golus na shawl von herren Here a gavina shawl you the min and tide a hit van I ein Sjaks a fajana yiggin the men as the pagan and madigan I tie the highest chickens on your cry, hello, it given. Destruction, solution, and gone the stations on the villain. Yorkshire and shin, a garvig as a book vara. Toyak the nabby and he guess ya. Fagman and manic and chicken. Pigmas just round the stool as the longest he can sign on stike again. On stike again, but a job that you're less pal, you didn't as liga. As the abbey by the goal alive, to this middle and shiver. Be pit I need to go over. Up the main host eating gorge him a gin, great a good dine post of volley. Van and the Vigintons min a kitten on G till any stjeren, sitting on corridors the bread and cycle round the Harricknan Medan. Some failure damage go on the Yicken sun weapons given. Sicken Rales Journelia Goldust and Shawl von Karen. O Van and the Vigintons min a kitten on G till any stjeren, sitting on corridors the bread and cycle round the Harricknan Medan.
Ah, well, who is ye for Yera Hall as for Shen, Skeel as an Aren, Man in Vegbeen, Skeel and the song of the Manx herring fishery, Man in Vegbeen, Philly Gorn singing there with the band. And the Manx herring fishery traditionally started on Fairlawn, but not if Fairlawn was a Saturday. It's an overnight fishery, and that would have meant going out fishing and then coming back and selling on the Sabbath. Well, they wouldn't go out on the Sabbath evening, the Sunday evening, so they would eventually have sailed on the Monday, with the first sails on the Tuesday, as happened in 1828 when Dorothy Wordsworth wrote of it in her diary, and as would have happened this year. Tre ren Hansel as Gretel douste, verdorgen hion, as ren Hansel gurgige huur begegge, as doorte, furiach tamelt beg Gretel, der wisse neest giri, esch bim a jabel da hagen a red tie, jorish brúliach a naran tam eer scale air. Maar so treffe neest se spare, giriad. Ach, a dodad fedden brúliach bi, jane aran. Noder au jienli na kelia, jienli na maren, jit, as a hrogel nieset. Ba Hansel smulnion fuddy de jinnach het fedden a red fos, na jai shed as ulju. Ach, a denkeliau. Haie drumboe fudden a hee shen, as fyen lay a gain, vien warrigus an jasterbeg, ach a dod fedden a red och maag as a geel, as vagris moer oru. On au weggoch de och berish na ge wat able te vloggen. As treffer geskeen a dodded frailrish gull a red, renned leishies for bilje, as henk cardlaru. With regard to Glenfaber Bob, William Gell also glosses the word classic, which he puts in inverted commas, and his note reads simply Manx. So he's saying that the coroner of Glenfaber fenced the open-air sitting of Tynwald in the Manx language, and that the Deemster then fenced the court in English. Well, from 1888 to 1906, William Kermode promulgated the laws in Manx. Some Tynwald members stepped in from 1906 to 1910, when a leader was appointed, apparently because no one else could or would read the laws in Manx. From that time, so a special person was appointed, and leader, to read the laws in Manx. It wasn't until 1967 that the second Deemster started promulgating the laws in Manx, taking over from an leader. At that time, that was Charles Smuadew and Robin Charles Crane, and for a number of years he was in the church and in the procession and on the hill with nothing to do at all. But from 1972, and Leida then became the first person to fence the court in Manx. Prior to that, it was only noted as happening once when it was done by the Speaker of the day, A.W. Moore. Mulligan's March, played by the trio Barul, a version of the tune of which W.H. Gill based his 1907 national anthem on, for which he came up with those 8 verses.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Siodiw stasiwn y nasiwn radio banning, ys creibus rchlash neg y tre ton, ach Claare na Gael. She Robert gytyn carsol mish, Robert a carslach mata.
Did the ever hear tell of old Bobby Bob?
Rys siachten looked the Claare na Gael gul scalia macht, die gedden rchlash and rish, trud in a degge radio banning, as a chraman eish rish. Ta podcast genius, bis redden nasty in a degge radio banning, na trud and reich the podcast ed, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Audible, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, na Alexa. Famed Tynwald Hill, historic mound of earth from every parish round, through ancient dynasties renowned. Thy triple sword would indicate a bond of union with the state, and Manannan's great triumvirate. Manannan's great triumvirate is glossed as the 3 legs. Well, the tradition is, as they say, that on Tynwald Hill there's a sod from every parish. I'm not sure what he means by thy triple sword, because Tynwald Hill has 4 tiers. William Gell had 3 sons and a daughter. I don't know whether they had a granddaughter called Phyllis, or whether he's just applying that name to refer to a child he saw evidently racing up and down the hill, either after the ceremony, perhaps just when visiting it on another occasion. This is what he writes. Huge steps, which Phyllis, trim and neat, with supple limbs and nimble feet, essays to mount, intent to beat her fellow chits, mid laughter merry, with cheeks outvying rose or cherry, but finds the steps are awkward, very. Fe nisharjit de vein trasvora nirus vad en Gael tain in era. Wat driw corebel gull raas gesennach, sha shen gerennet vetten macht er het eeren sages se geel. Sha shen wat vetten macht er het eeren sages se geel. As man er koene jit de lie wege dan jeden bes viagris. Mush mun lai honnik ad ushag eilen gobena stjakte, na saai banglen, as Gael de rein gemillish, de rennet stappel de eisjachri. As tre huggen usjo kjon shen, renny scalia macht na skien en ek as detcheli rauw, as daire durri, der a renka tai beg. As hai en ushig de vein a saai a clay. As tre henket na snedda, honniket de rauwe tai trogit as aran, as van clay jint asperinen, as van unjeg jint as sugar solace. Niemand Gael pertje shaw doet Hansel, as be lunje brouwein. Nim me pertje in clay, Gretel, as for the us Gael pertje in unjeg, be blas millishek. Maar so en Hansel shinasus as frische pisje in clay. Well, we heard Phil Gaughan singing there just before with the band Skeel. Here he is singing, accompanied by Annie Kissack, and it's a song called E as Lay.
Greheld sein auf Charakter, Fodiak san and Delia. Greheld sein auf Charakter, Fodiak san and Delia. Ias les mishken kadla, jak the cadums bless my head, for the soul of dear jolly fogel and caltes kaya good me as les mishken kadla, jak the cadums bless my head, for the soul of dear jolly fogel and caltes kaya good me. Jolny sogest janne hurragen come bessens lengen stjura och marigari gaeter a legen for me and red muggers and nelja mannen vinen jegum sara.
Phil Gorn and Annie Kissack there, the song E is Lair, a development of a fragment that was collected in Lonnan, because it's a song that's associated with Ballarach, and Henry Skillicorn, a Lonnan man, was on the shore below Ballarach somewhere, and he was captured by pirates and taken away, and he was a fiddle player, and on the ship he made up that song as well, which is mocking the people who've captured him. Eventually he had a life at sea. He became a rich merchant in Bristol, and he married an heiress, and when the heiress inherited the land, it was in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, and he saw that there was a spa, a spring of water on this estate, and so Henry Skillicorn set to, and he developed it, and he was the man who developed Cheltenham Spa as a place where a lot of people visited and became very well known, and it was the basis of the town's success. So that's Henry Skillicorn of Lonnan and the fragment he wrote, E is Lay, which was developed by Phil and Annie there, and to that song, E is Lay. Gau Hansel noes pies Jane Claare, innig in de Manannan Mac Lir weg geblaas Jay. As for Gretel na siade weg an onjig, as er any kaid niori. Esh, Giel het Corée hanne gillach mach vai chau stai. Shulga, gurish luch a trai. Koive shulga ek ma hai. As dragon a patchen. Na cur Gael be, finnerach de gie as ren het frail rishi gin vei burrich. Ren Hansel tre hure macht er ouwe chle blastel fi vai, Gael noes cloud brauji. As ren Gretel tarmach rundtag moer Jane onjig, as hai shies as gaui toiag der. Esh, doshel de Doris, as Hank Shan ben mach as ish krome lorg achlish. For Hansel as Gretel aglich as rennet ligge tusjum de bons na Lauwenok, ach renne Shan ven snoggel a kjonek as doorty, ma fetchen veen, krenacht Hank shoe de way and shaw. Signed you chits jach on as tannacht dan merem, bish you tulielach dau. Gebish you tulielach dau. So from St. John's as we are, and now a hasty glance at Peel, home of the Mollig and the Creel. Deepest regret each soul must feel for that departing industry, when Peel folk, busy as the bee, reaped the rich harvest of the sea. Inconstant Heron, love of yore, thy fickleness we all deplore. what lured thee thus from Mannin's shore? We hail thee, monarch of the main, may Mannin's prayers be not in vain to bring the old love back again. Well, the fishing industry has had its peaks and troughs, and in 1906 the Manx herring industry was clearly in a trough, though Manx boats still went to other grounds, including Kinsale for mackerel up to about 1916, and to the Scottish grounds for herring. About 30 years after this poem, a new fishery developed in Manx waters for scallops, and then another 30 years after that for queenies. I remember Terry Kringle was always very anxious to cover the start of the herring fishery, but at the time he was doing that, what he didn't realise was there was really only one boat participating in it. It was mainly Northern Irish boats. Now, in the Irish cycles, Manannan Mac Lir is linked with an island called Owen Ulach, and Ulach is to do with apples. Because of the strong identification of the Isle of Man with Manannan, it came to be looked on, the island itself looked to be looked on as Owen Ulach, and in its Latinised form that was known as Eubonia, as in this song performed by Ruth Keggin and Rachel Hare.
Jeek, jeek, yn chriant ar eilian ni, son salja daut a gennal sai. Ten bilja fina smånach tru, ma sjo te jein kunde smu. Molly di merums vanna ni, en ljunvaileja has a vrij. Dak sien as dakrel ton de cholle soler sprinjon, de becha stechel makka kol, de newtje sjoga lashen se, en nur as de me get en lush veche, hasatjes tashen ish. Molly di merums vanna ni, en ljunvaileja has a vrij. Dak sien as dakrel ton de cholle soler sprinjon. Hesje gauw en flesje goed, krenach teens, da strunna ruud. Martin voldoeide koel en laal, maar schente sjaalje sjaalsen gaal. Malledje merens van en nie, en ljunvailedje as a vrij. Dag zien as dakrelton, de golle soler springen jon. Pesje shot a dinner in die jela. Malledje merens van en nie, en ljunvailedje as a vrij. Dag stien as dakrelton, de golle soler springen jon. O boyachen, de koortje geel, de ednel, de niefeliel. Duches a dug dunne shavai, na shot a shesh, de gesne sway. Malledje merens van en nie, en ljunvailedje as a vrij. Dag stien as dakrelton, de golle soler springen jon.
And mostly what we heard was a worldly song composed by a cleric who went on to be Bishop of Soden Man, Samuel Rutter. And the song was Eubonia Sailjach, Eubonia Bright, say Eubonia, a Latinized form of Owen Ulach. And there we heard Ruth Keggin and Rachel Hare. And at the end, Rachel also sang a little fragment called Yn Grainveg Orn, the little grain of barley, which of course was used for brewing purposes. It's been but a glance towards Peel from Tynwald Hill, and Gell continues. Slewallian stands in bold relief, the miniature of Tenerife. Well, I fear he's fantasizing there, but anyway. But speed we on, for time is brief. Our way lies over hill and dale, and passing by, we must not fail to cast a glance at Foxtel Vale, with mining once in busy state, but sadly at this later date of Laxey Glen the duplicate. Now, Foxdale Mine started in 1724 with good returns going until the end of the 19th century. Despite the impression that Gell gives, the Foxdale mines were still in production, although costs were starting to outweigh returns. He compares the situation with Laxey, but decline there was bolstered by restructuring in 1903, and in fact mining continued in Laxey, as we all know from Stuart Slack's song, until 1929. In Foxdale, though, the end came in 1911, when, even though the miners had agreed to lower pay just to remain in employment, the situation was unsustainable and work ceased at the end of July 1911. Lurkshen, Rennie Jean Dow Del Yavi Beg Ben, as Hug Hansel as Gretel at Heen and Lie Oru, as ved smunnion de Rauwed ons Njau. Geder au immerke Jan ben go kindjel, wie na drach witch, wel lie cool glees on patchen, as we roggel de tie beg je jaun de glene had. Lurk dau ach we stai, van gliachte ek de warrowad, de gogra had, as de iad, as esch we lane failure son. Jerk was sullion of witch, as gedoddy fagen vader, a gorer be. Ach verkiel sorrel hier ek, golden de been, as vis maaiek tref a creaturen den joil chit fair. Verkiel sorrel hier ek, gurish na been, as vis maaiek tref a creaturen den joil chit fair. Tref a vis ek de rau Hansel as Gretel chit, rennig gere de gonlesach, as durti de bogesach, tad emmes, as ha jinned skip eilvom. A good cheesy finish there. More music by the trio Barul, their version of Jaunasach Vona, Mona's Delight.
Manx Radio.
Stasiwn yn asiwn tyn e sio siend greu radio fanning. On sio tawas geisiach, Rish Claare na Gael. Meron pin, Robert Gytyn Carswell, Robert a Carslach.
Ever heard tell of our Bobby Bob?
De morgen savora, roos maar aan de patchen en douche. Jiri de jen oru. As gouds wat den lijn en gadle geschioil, as leggen en kroen roesach. Door die rihien, kreien gien biemes. Esch gauw I Grimm je Hansel les je lauw fjochetje, as rennie li jele stjach on stable beg. As rennie doen a stjach eet jou gulu je clear. As quish as wij gillig maken skrijgen, wij ons verdeel. Esch ha je bak as Gretel, as rennie krei, as demi mag, soes liat letja, kor liat ostja, as gin koger rinach mais on de vrij, te jou moeis a stable, as sign there wij bait, trev te rauwe de loer, niem ie. Gauw Gretel toiach der Kenia de sharu, ach wij ons verdeel. Feori Junu Claare Bib and Drach Witch Shirori. As Mersov and sort share the V na Chogres on Hansel Bach, Gouds gedoe Gretel Weg a Schligen Parten. Dag Mara Jinnach en Chan Ven Golgus a stable beg. Here, to the westward, by the way, we promised but the other day to count the charms of sweet Glen May. Well, in fact, at the end of the first instalment, Canto 1, as it became, after going down the east coast from Douglas, round the Sound and coming up the west coast, he writes that Dalby Point stands sentinel of fair Glen May. Though sorely tempted, by the way, we'll count its charms another day. So now here in Canto 8 he finally does so. Dame Nature's handmaids, amply trained, with wisdom by experience gained, their several forces here arraigned, each into service now was pressed. And this fair glen was duly dressed with all the beauties of the rest. Nor did they stop at this alone. Stamped with a beauty all its own, 'twas chosen for their sovereign's throne. Its charms so eerie to the sight that goblin, boggle, gnome, and sprite soon chose it for their court by night, the rustic folk to scare and fright. We go back to the band Skeel, and this time with more music about Manannan.
Manannan Mac Lir, Annie
Skeal, with two songs about Manannan and Manannan Mac Lir, about going out on the fishing boat and doing well. For all the bits and pieces that William Gell writes about here, the two bits of folklore that I can think of associated with Glen May are the Buggane of Glen May, who made off with the lazy wife over his shoulder, but she just managed to escape by cutting the strings of her apron. And then down at the shore was where the Manx, the Munja beggar, went down to repel an attack, perhaps leprechauns from Ireland or boggarts from Scotland, and they beat them off in a battle observed by a man who made sure he kept his head down and didn't let any of them see him. People in Glen May as well were particularly worried about a Carbal Ushtia, a water horse in the glen down from the Spoot Dwyer, the big waterfall. Anyone foolish enough to try to mount the Carbal Ushtia would be taken down into the depths and drowned. When people had just very small numbers of cattle to help support their family, the Tara Ushtia, the water bull, coming out of the river or any stretch of water and tempting away a cow to its death would have been an economic disaster, so another bad thing, the Tara Ushtia. Chow mwy jen chlir ynachi ilach mach Hansel, shin mach de ver, de wadam tickle biw rauwer de loer de leer. Ach ynnach Hansel shin amach crauw weg, as gedodden shan ven, as go vers na soeljenek, fagen na vaughan, as is shielten de ne mer Hansel vaughan, as we go lindes de moon na rawi na chit de ve na srura. Treffer keer sjaachtin en ul sja, as Hansel gien de hannachten chotana, cholie minid, as harawi arltach de orten na soja. Nish Gretel demi een nienweg, gin Cyrus tarnusje, bel Hansel rauwer na veli keel, lijn verach te arm marwe as cogre, o hui siechen ver a huur bach, tre bach weg de rawe uri corlien ustje, as huish ren de jay rolle schies herish na liegen en ek. Ye been koenlien tammy gwiort dilly. De bergsjen er wij tek bij en faai se geel, like a goed slew, bergsjen en gedden best goedjach. Oh, we had this in Guller's Gargan as well, but here we are again with Greg Jochen and Barul in search of Manannan.
And leave your bread and beer, leave your warm and tender touch and all that you hold dear. Hey ho, leave your home, it's time to go and leave the baby in its cot, leave your bread and beer, and take me to the mountain through the mist and failing light. Take a silver lantern with us deep into the night. Hey ho, take the road and let's now go and take me to the mountain in the mist and fading light. Seeking down the deepest well and out across the moor, seeking where the savage cliff touches to the shore. Hey ho, seeking high and seeking low, seeking down the deepest well and out across the moor. We came at length upon the rue where carved into the slate appeared a mighty fortress that was sealed with golden gates. Hey ho, can you let me know, is the master home? We came upon a fortress sealed with golden gates. Across the fury fills the air, a blinding flash of light, and as the gate to move, a giant voice calls in the night. Who is it that broke my sleep? and who that has no fear, and who that dares to lead the way before. Manannan Mac Lir.
Greg Jochen and Barul in search of Manannan. Na gin bor orm leis de gobberen door de chanven, te de sledden ons verdeel. De morgen morrer gain weer Gretel iri, voor de Nile as Lina chorre. Hayacht niemage funje, door de chanven, tammy chowen och hanna, as het heestne taste. Now, having given a roll call of these figures from folklore associated with Glen May, William Gell concludes, "At least, so says the historic White, and I suppose he must be right, and yet I should be quite afraid to vouch for stories of this grade. I'd sooner call a spade a spade." I think the historic White must be A.W. Moore in his folklore of the Isle of Man. But that's rather hedging your bets, isn't it? Telling the stories but then giving a disclaimer at the end. Ach, my dalur na manna, nay, my dalur eight and treyer jit the chorkion Claare Shaw. Chris Pearson is your host for the next 2 hours, bringing you the best of chill-out music for your Sunday evening. At 9, Judith Lay is here with Sundown to ease you into Monday morning, Tynwald Day. Claare and Gael comes to a close with Claare celebrating Manannan Mac Lir. A Cartnish Shanae, and so until the next time, this is Robert Cutting-Carr, Robert a Carslach.
Old Bobby Bob.
Wishing you a very good night, Eve, I'm a Chriorts, as Duts, my Yerian share.